this is certainly a video I didn't expect to be making, but hello and welcome. I'm MCFPapa, and a second lawsuit involving Big Fish Games has just been posted as of a few days ago. Now, last week I covered Grandma suing Big Fish Games, but this time Big Fish Games themselves are suing Elephant Games. Once again, shout out to Roamer Monkey, friend of the channel, for helping to break this story and doing some great journalism as always. And so, once again, I'm gonna be breaking down a lawsuit, the second in 2 weeks. As you can see, this was filed on May 18th, and this time it's BFG Entertainment as the plaintiff, while Elephant Games is the defendant. It seems Elephant Games is now reincorporated as an Armenian company, which is a fun fact I didn't know about. Once again, before getting into this, I'm not a lawyer. This is just basically my observations and comments, and nothing in this should be taken as legal advice. Anyway, they filed in the same court as the Grandma lawsuit, of course, since that's where Big Fish Games still operates, and this time it's a complaint for breach of contract, declaratory relief, specific performance, unjust enrichment, quantum meruit, injunctive relief, and declaratory judgment. This time, BFG Entertainment is alleging that Elephant is the one breaking the agreements, while in the Grandma lawsuit, Grandma was alleging that Big Fish Games were the ones breaking their agreements. One thing I will say about this is at least it's only 13 pages long, whereas the Grandma lawsuit was 20, so hopefully this should be a bit quicker for me to get through. In the start, they explain that BFG is a Delaware corporation, and Elephant Games is located in the Republic of Armenia. And then the jurisdiction and venue are proper in King County, because the defendants reside in and do business in King County. Just gotta state the obvious so that it's considered a proper proceeding, I guess. And then I thought this was very funny. For the facts section, starting off, they say BFG is a leading global platform for premium casual PC and mobile games. They are a platform. I wouldn't say they're anywhere close to being a leading platform, especially given something like Steam exists, or even Epic Games, or even GOG, I'd say, are much more popular than Big Fish Games is. But I guess they're one of many platforms, and I guess relatively speaking, they are kind of a leader compared to many other tiny niche platforms. I don't know. But anyway, then they just go on to state the obvious, that Elephant Games Limited was the preceding company to the new Elephant Games AR LLC company. And then Big Fish Games Inc. is a company that publishes and distributes casual video games. Great paragraph right there. Anyway, they talk about the first agreement that Big Fish and Elephant had, which was from 2008, which states that Big Fish's rights include pretty much everything possible. Patent law, copyright law, moral rights law, trade secret law, trademark law, and unfair competition law. And then they also emphasize that they are entitled to any game object code and related source code, and then all the other rights and such. And then they talk about the Intellectual Property Strategy Alliance Agreement, which is also outlining Big Fish's rights, basically stating the same thing again. And then they entered in 2014 into the free-to-play game development agreement, which defines deliverables as all the components of a game, including all their source code to them. And then they restate again that at Big Fish's request, Elephant will promptly submit the entire source code existing as of the request date relating to each game specified. And then in the next section, they talk about how they are works made for hire, and that Elephant grants to Big Fish all the rights to use, reproduce, distribute, broadcast, transmit, perform, and display, publicly or otherwise, all of their games and such that they made, and also the permission to modify any of their tools or engines for the games and deliverables. I think what this is referring to is like needing to edit some things to make the games available on Steam or other platforms like that down the road. And then under Section 13B, they talk about how either party may terminate this agreement if the other party materially breaches this agreement and fails to cure it within 30 days following the notice from the non-breaching party. So then they get on to yet another agreement. I don't know why Big Fish made so many agreements, but they entered into the amended and restated Game Intellectual Property Strategic Alliance Agreement. What a mouthful. And then once again reiterating they have the rights to all the stuff, including game object code and related source code. And then they did a second amended and restated Game Intellectual Property Strategic Alliance Agreement. They couldn't have thought of a better name for the second one, I guess. But it says in this that Elephant hereby sells and transfers all rights, including without limitation all intellectual property rights, title and interest in all the games, to Big Fish. And then elaborating that intellectual property rights mean all the stuff applicable, once again doing emphasis, but this time because they had already italicized the stuff, they had to bold it for this emphasis, even though it's basically saying the same exact thing once again. And that Elephant grants Big Fish the right to use, reproduce, distribute, broadcast, transmit, perform, and display, and to modify them, basically saying the same thing again. And in this agreement also, there's the 30 days written notice to the other party upon the party's breach to allow them to terminate this agreement. And then also it says that if Elephant is in breach of this agreement, no advances or revenue share will be paid by Big Fish unless such breach is cured by the developer. So that's a very important thing, that if Elephant breaches, then they don't gotta pay them anything. And that in the event of the termination, Big Fish still retains all of the game rights. And then in connection to this, they did an assignment agreement where Elephant assigns to Big Fish all the right, title, and interest in and to the works, basically saying Big Fish owns everything, including all the copyrights, even in supplemental materials created like the instructions, manuals, or artwork, and any other element or component thereof. So basically Big Fish owns everything according to this agreement. And then in 2022 they entered a consent to assignment which transferred all of the agreements from Elephant Games to Elephant Games AR, the new successor company. And they allege that this assignment didn't waive or release Elephant's obligations to Big Fish under any previous agreement. Then, on February 1st, 2025, they entered into the Premium Games Agreement, also known as the Mobile Distribution and Publishing Game Agreement, where it was agreed that BFG would have complete access to the IP of multiple games. And then they define what a game is, and that it also includes the source code and programming associated with it. And now, this is something very interesting. According to this agreement, it says that Elephant grants to Big Fish a non-transferable but sub-licensable right to sell, distribute, license, or publish the games through distribution channels to end users on platforms, and also do everything else basically related to the games. Use, copy, adapt, perform, display, edit, compress, translate, transmit, market, promote, advertise, modify, and otherwise exploit them. Which, I mean, you might be saying that Big Fish is kind of exploitative in some of its stuff. But anyway, what is so notable about this paragraph is that in Grandma's lawsuit, they cite that they were given an agreement to have the exclusive mobile rights to develop all of their games for mobile platforms. But in this, it seems that the Elephant agreement was instead that Big Fish had the right to everything, including mobile. And then also in this 2025 agreement, it says that Elephant will soon deliver to Big Fish a compressed archive or repository of all the game's code, so that Big Fish can distribute them through the channels. And then Big Fish BFG Entertainment bought Big Fish, and therefore all the agreements should then apply to BFG Entertainment. And then upon acquiring Big Fish, BFG requested Elephant deliver all of the materials owed due to the agreements, basically meaning the source code and such. And then BFG determined that certain items were missing, And then they list all the items missing: game builds, Unity builds, engines and frameworks, and all artwork, images, sounds, and graphical assets associated with the Elephant Games developed entries for Big Fish. Basically saying that BFG had a lot of stuff that wasn't provided from Elephant to them. And then they talk about how there were source codes, Unity builds, engines, and frameworks missing, including 13 Android versions, 21 mobile versions, and 98 additional game builds and related configurations. I'm assuming that the 98 additional builds are various PC platform versions of many Elephant's entries. Then they say that BFG requested they provide the missing materials, and Elephant stated they already had given Big Fish all of the materials that were relevant. And then Big Fish said that no source code was ever transferred to them by either Elephant or Elephant AR, the successors. And then Elephant AR denied another request to give the missing materials, stating that even if they wanted to, they deleted all the related source code, which that is just very funny to me, if that's actually true. But then Big Fish says that they couldn't have done this because they had licensed all the source codes to Big Fish and didn't own it, so they couldn't delete it. And then Big Fish told Elephant AR that the deletion of the source codes constituted a severe and material breach of their agreements. So then, upon analyzing previous inquiries, they think that Big Elephant doesn't delete source code but stores it in physical storage servers and in repositories. Now, this paragraph to me seems a lot like speculation, since BFG offers no actual proof that they know that Elephant hasn't deleted the source code, instead just claiming that they know that they store it. I mean, maybe they did in the past, but who's to say whether Elephant did or didn't delete it already? So then, on December 3rd, 2025, BFG sends a termination notice to Elephant, but then, pulling an Uno reverse card, over a month later, Elephant sends its own termination notice back to Big Fish. But anyway, something else interesting is that BFG is trying to make themselves look better, I notice here, by saying that they attempted to terminate the agreement's faith, even waiving recoupment of several game advance payments. Now, this is interesting. This is another thing that kind of contradicts what was alleged in the Grandma lawsuit, where BFG was refusing to pay Grandma, and even feeling that they were entitled to money that Grandma had gotten as advance for future games. But here, BFG is stating that they were just so nice they waived this recoupment for Elephant. And then, a month after the termination notice from Elephant to BFG, they sent another letter alleging breach of the 2014 agreement and that BFG was in default, not Elephant, because BFG had not paid anything for November and December 2025 that they were entitled to. And then BFG responds by sending a letter to Elephant outlining multiple breaches of 6 different agreements. So it just keeps on stacking up a back and forth where each one is trying to point out how the other side has breached more and more. And then still, despite this letter, Elephant refused to provide any source codes to BFG. And then Elephant sends another termination of the 2018 agreement, demanding all the outstanding royalty payments they're entitled to. And then on April 28th, BFG sends a response saying, no, you can't terminate the 2018 agreement. We're terminating the 2018 agreement. And that they're supposed to cease all distribution of BFG's licensed games. And now, this is another interesting thing. Elephant continues distributing the BFG games on Apple and Google mobile platforms, which this would seem to indicate that they do have some sort of mobile right, similar to what Grandma has, where they get the rights to distribute them via mobile. But the BFG lawsuit makes no mention of such a document, and obviously they wouldn't, because that makes them look really bad. Like, a lot of their case hinges on Elephant distributing the games without justification. So then, getting on to the claims, they entered into various agreements, and BFG says that they were granted all of the intellectual property, including the code and source codes, and that they breached the agreements by not giving the codes to BFG. And that then they talk about how Elephant terminated without valid cause, which they only terminated it in response to what BFG had done to terminate it first. So that seems a bit silly to me. And then they've been damaged in an amount to be proven at time of trial due to this. And that BFG is mitigating its damages by ceasing to pay royalties as allowed by the agreements, which is basically, this does actually tie into what Grandma said, which was BFG refused to pay them their royalties because of the justification. They had already paid them money for advances that they aren't gonna be able to recoup. So that's another interesting tie-in. And then they ask for Elephant to be ordered to provide BFG all the materials and source codes, and that if they don't, then Elephant should be ordered to pay for damages BFG will incur to develop and reprogram new source code, estimated to be well over $1 million. Now, I don't know if this would even be possible, if the source code is gone, would they be able to extract enough from the already existing finished games to like recompile them into a new code? I'm not sure if that's even like physically possible, or would they have to basically rebuild everything from scratch and just try to make an approximation for how the games used to be. And now, Elephant apparently contends that no contracts were entered into that imposed a duty to produce or store source codes. And now, what's interesting about this lawsuit is they're trying to make it as bad for Elephant as possible, even if there is a judgment in Elephant's favor, where they point out stuff like, were this court to agree with Elephant, then Elephant would be liable for damages under the theories of unjust enrichment and quantum meruit. And now, in case you're wondering what the heck quantum meruit means, it basically means that they would be able to recover losses for what they deserve, like how Elephant would have to pay them because of the damages they did. But of course, because it's a fancy schmancy legal document, they gotta do fancy Latin in it. And that Big Fish entered into agreements for obtaining the IP rights of the games, including the source codes. And that BFG purchased the assets of the old Big Fish because of all the rights to intellectual property. And then again, covering their bases, if Elephant is not contractually obliged to perform the agreements and provide the source codes, then it'll be unjustly enriched by accepting all royalties and development fees without providing them. Basically saying that, just trying to make it as bad for Elephant as possible, even if Big Fish loses the lawsuit. And that if the court agrees with Elephant, then BFG should be entitled to recover all the royalties and development fees it paid to them for intellectual property rights. And that BFG, once again, should be entitled to recover damages if Elephant is found to be in the right. And then they talk about how Elephant continues to distribute them on Google and Apple platforms, and that it's causing damage, including immediately and irreparable harm to BFG. Oh, I'm sure BFG, the company, is just having a heart attack right now because of the Elephant having their games on the app stores. And then they talk about how it'd cause the loss of its IP, damage to goodwill, and lost revenue. Now, damage to goodwill is very, very funny to me, because BFG has been doing plenty to damage their goodwill already without any involvement from Elephant. And then they talk about here how BFG is the exclusive license holder, including the mobile platforms, not any agreement like what Grandma had, where Grandma was entitled to it. Very interesting. And then for their prayer for relief, they hope to find that BFG isn't in breach and that the defendant has to give them the source code and pay damages for all the stuff that has occurred because of this. And then once again trying to cover their bases, saying that that the amounts BFG may owe to the defendant are offset against damages they've suffered. And also very interesting, requiring the defendant to immediately remove all the stuff from the Apple and Google platforms. So I guess if you really love playing an elephant mobile game, you're gonna be out of luck pretty soon. Or I suppose Big Fish would just re-release their own version on the platforms. I don't know. And then declaring that BFG is the entitled owner of everything, and then they should transfer ownership of the games on mobile to BFG. And then, of course, award of attorney fees and costs and other relief. Basically saying, yeah, please, if you want, give us more money as a reward. And then submitted by H. Troy Romero of Romero Park, PS. I don't know what PS stands for, but this is H. Troy Romero, attorney / president. And something interesting is Grandma's attorney seemed pretty good, but Big Fish is able to afford a named partner at a law firm for their attorney. And then looking at the overview, like he has so many education and admissions and a ton of experience. He talks about several major multi-million-dollar cases he had, and even has a little profile about what he's like as a person, and also what services he does, which I suppose this falls under intellectual property business trade practices law. But he seems to really have quite a wide net of services. Anyway, this is the case data for the filing. It was filed on the 18th, like I mentioned earlier. And also it says here that Dylan Thomas Elton is another lawyer on the case. It seems like he's a junior lawyer at the Romero law firm. Basically, I'm guessing what it'll be is Dylan Thomas Elton does pretty much all the work, while H. Troy Romero just sits back and rests on his laurels and collects a paycheck for it. That's my guess anyway. But then there's the documents and the events for it. And now this is something very interesting. The trial is set for May 24th, 2027. Which is just a week after the trial dealing with Grandma versus BFG Entertainment. So my guess is that one of them will get pushed back, unless maybe BFG Entertainment decides to hire a second lawyer to deal with the Grandma case. I'm not sure, but this could have very interesting implications. For example, if Grandma is found to be the winner of their case, that could have a big impact on BFG Entertainment's allegations in the second case. Either way, it seems like BFG Entertainment has a lot on their hands in May next year. Something else, though, I'd just like to point out is that in the old grandma lawsuit, well, not old, it's just a week older, but they point out in it that grandma specifically performed its obligations under the agreements, including also all non-monetary obligations, including delivery of all requested source code archives. Now that is a very interesting difference. So, is it true? Is Elephant really at fault this time for not providing the source code properly? I don't know, maybe. Of course, I might be a bit biased against BFG Entertainment because they don't seem like a very good company, even worse than older Big Fish, and seem very greedy. So could this be just a way for them to try and weasel out of paying Elephant in the same way they've tried to weasel out of paying Grandma? Perhaps. Maybe Grandma is correct, but Elephant isn't in their lawsuit. Who knows? I'm sure there will be more news to come on both of these cases, because I assume Elephant is gonna draft a counterclaim, and BFG Entertainment is gonna draft a counterclaim to these lawsuits. But just a very interesting situation. I didn't really ever think that I would be doing one legal breakdown, much less two. And it's certainly more interesting than any news about the next MCF game, of which there is precisely 0 so far. Perhaps this is just an elaborate ARG where the new Mystery Case Files series is the case files of the courtroom itself. But anyway, that'll do it for this video. I hope it was at least informative about the two lawsuits. Are you on the side of Elephant or on the side of BFG Entertainment with this lawsuit? I'm not sure. Honestly, with this one, I'm leaning kind of toward Elephant being the one in the wrong this time. But of course, that might just be due to the way this one is written by BFG's lawyers, so they're trying to make him look as favorable as possible. And I suppose you could say that about the first lawsuit, where Grandma was trying to make themselves look as favorable. Hopefully, there's actual developments on this case down the road, with, like, response briefings filed and stuff, and if there are any news related to these cases, I will of course keep you informed as best I can. I really hope these things actually get to trial so we can actually find out who's been proven correct in all of this. You know, I would hate for it to settle out of court and then we never know really the truth. But anyway, hope you enjoyed the second legal breakdown video I've done. Who knows, there might be a third lawsuit filed against Big Fish or by Big Fish at some point in the future. I'm not sure, but if there is, of course, I'll break that one down too. But anyway, like and subscribe if you want, and I'll see you in the third part of the non-commentary and mystery case files, The Riddle of Mrs. Bishop, coming tomorrow, so look forward to that.